The South African sun, capable of bestowing warmth and life, sometimes only serves to illuminate the most hidden corners of the human soul. In Johannesburg, a city that breathes with energy and unimaginable contrasts, where gleaming skyscrapers rise above modest dwellings and hopes for a better tomorrow desperately battle harsh realities, its own peculiar world of crime was born. A world where the fight for survival turns into a deadly game, and everyday concerns are suddenly overshadowed by horror. This refers to a phenomenon commonly called the taxi mafia, a ruthless, highly organized force of criminality, sowing fear in entire cities, whose victims, alas, often remain but nameless shadows in statistical reports. Imagine a typical morning in Soweto, one of Johannesburg's most expansive and recognizable districts. The streets are not yet filled with the dense flow of buses and private cars, but the familiar rumble of minibus taxi engines is already audible, the very bop-bop of the minibus taxis. These yellow and black minivans are rightfully the true pulse of South Africa's transport system, a vital artery connecting millions of people to their workplaces, homes, friends, and family. For most, they are not just a means of transport, but often the only real opportunity to move around within a state public transport system that is far from the most efficient and is quite expensive. However, behind this familiar facade of everyday bustle lies a brutal and unsightly truth. At the very core of the taxi mafia lies a simple but no less ruthless logic: absolute control over the most profitable transport routes. Taxi drivers, as if bound by an unspoken pact, carve up the city's roads amongst themselves. Should any new driver dare to trespass on their territory, to upset the established order, the consequences can be truly dire. These aren't mere minor disagreements or scuffles. We're talking about calculated, often brutal punishments designed to intimidate rivals and maintain control. We will delve into one such case that, unlike many others, might have vanished without a trace in the daily news cycle, were it not for the tragic fate of one family. At the heart of our story is the Mbule family, residing in a cozy yet humble home on the outskirts of Johannesburg. It's important for us not only to remember those who fell victim, but also those left behind, whose lives were forever darkened. The Mbule clan, like many others, was an integral part of this intricate transportation system. They owned several minibuses, operating on a bustling route connecting Soweto to the city's business districts. Business was quite successful. The family lived harmoniously, exerting maximum effort to provide their children with a decent future. Mr. Sifiso Mbule was the head of the family, a quiet man yet deeply respected among his acquaintances. His wife, Noma, served as the unshakable pillar for their entire household. She was a caring mother whose love filled their home with warmth, and a woman who, despite all adversities, always found the strength to share her smile with the world. But one day, on a gray, rainy Tuesday, the Mbule family's familiar world irrevocably shattered. Sifo, as usual, was heading to his ordinary work shift. He was driving one of his minivans, navigating the city streets with the radio playing, when suddenly another car blocked his path. Sifo, a driver with many years of experience, instinctively sensed that something was wrong. Even before he could take any meaningful action, the doors of his taxi burst open, and two men unyieldingly flooded inside. What exactly transpired in the following moments is known only through scattered eyewitness accounts and details from subsequent investigations. But the fact remains undeniable: Sifiso Mbule was murdered. A single, precise shot ended his life. The killers vanished into the night as swiftly as they had appeared, leaving behind only a ringing silence, thick with dread and the scent of spilled blood. Noma Mbule waited patiently for her husband at home, in their humble dwelling, where each minute stretched into an eternity. Time relentlessly marched onward, yet Sifiso did not return. His usual appearance in the doorway never materialized. All her desperate attempts to reach him by phone went unanswered, intensifying the chilling premonition that had settled deep within her soul. Anxiety, like an invisible web, enshrouded her heart, tightening its grip with every passing minute. And then, when at last the long-awaited, yet so terrible call from the police came, informing her of what had occurred, Noma's familiar world crumbled in an instant, turning to dust. This was no mere ordinary murder. It was a brutal message. A message from those who held the reins of power, who controlled every step along this perilous path. Those who saw everyone who dared trespass on their territories or claim a share of their influence as nothing more than a ruthless enemy. The investigation began immediately, but from the very first hour, it became clear. This was not an ordinary crime, but merely the tip of an iceberg, concealing far more sinister and dangerous secrets. Investigator Detective Joseph Ntlalbi, a seasoned officer worn down by the endless stream of similar cases, immediately recognized that he was looking at only the tip of a far more significant problem. In South Africa, where the law's reach often faltered in the most remote corners, and where corruption could seep even into the ranks of law enforcement, battling organized crime, especially in specialized sectors like freight transport, was an indeed incredibly complex undertaking. This was no random act of violence, Noma, Detective Ntlalbi stated, his voice carrying both profound empathy and unwavering vigilance. Your husband became a victim because he refused to yield, because he dared to conduct business where others had decided to impose their own brutal rules. Initially, Noma was completely consumed by her grief. Fear, like a cold web, ensnared her, causing her to flinch at every sound, at every unfamiliar face. She perfectly understood that the criminals could belong to that caste of people who dictated terms on the streets, those who possessed unlimited influence and extensive connections. The thought of seeking help, of giving testimony, seemed mortally dangerous to her. In such situations, victims often chose silence, fearing inevitable retaliation. Reputation, the safety of loved ones, everything was put at risk. Noma, however, was not one to easily surrender. Deep within her soul burned a flame of fury, intertwined with boundless maternal love. She saw her children, 2 sons and 1 daughter, living in constant fear, their young eyes relentlessly searching for threats in every corner. The thought that her husband's death would go unpunished, and that those who sowed death and destruction would continue their wicked deeds, was unbearable to her. Detective Ntlalbi understood Noma's inner turmoil. His role extended beyond the usual search for clues. He felt it his duty to let those who had fallen victim to cruelty know they were not alone in their plight. He visited Noma personally, bringing her news, even if it were just tiny, yet significant steps toward justice. The detective patiently explained the system to her, the obstacles faced on the path to justice, and how invaluable her own role was in this process. People are afraid to speak, Noma, he instructed her. They fear they will suffer the same fate as your husband, or that their children will be harmed. But if we remain silent in the shadows, these individuals will continue their criminal activities, feeling utterly unaccountable. Their wicked deeds will not cease unless they are confronted. Your courage, your decision to speak, could save many lives. The detective investigation was gradually taking shape, the picture of what was happening becoming clearer. Dozens of other drivers working similar city routes were interviewed. Not all were ready to share information openly. Many, averting their gaze awkwardly, reluctantly muttered evasive answers. A heavy sense of fear, like an invisible web, enveloped the streets, felt almost physically, piercing one to the very core. However, there were those who, despite the danger, displayed bravery. Among them were people whose own families had suffered from the actions of this taxi mafia, or those who personally knew families who had lost loved ones. It was they, overcoming their fear, who began to speak, gradually revealing the truth. The first, still unclear, hints emerged regarding who might have been involved in the brutal murder of Sifiso. It became clear that the Mbule family had not been targeted by chance. It all began with a fierce conflict with a rival transporter, whose minivans had increasingly started appearing on their favored, familiar route. Leading this criminal enterprise was a certain Victor Z. Mnguni, a figure widely known for his extreme cruelty and close ties to the most dangerous criminal underworld. Gathering evidence proved to be a real test, exhausting and lengthy. Those who committed this crime acted with frightening professionalism, like ghosts, leaving no obvious traces. However, Detective Ntlabi and his dedicated team did not give up, tirelessly continuing their work, interrogating, investigating, analyzing every little detail. Security camera footage was meticulously examined, despite the fact that many of them were either out of order or of extremely low quality, capturing events only as blurry spots. Despite fear, witnesses were found willing to speak. Their testimonies, though spoken in trembling voices, became invaluable. They were able to describe the vehicle the perpetrators fled in, and even provide a rough description of one of the criminals. One of the most significant breakthroughs came through engaging local communities. In Africa, where family and community ties are incredibly strong, information often travels through informal, unseen networks. Detective Ntlabi, a native of the region himself, understood perfectly how crucial it was to build trust. He met personally with respected community leaders, imams, and pastors, explaining that this case was about more than just the letter of the law. It was about the very essence of justice for every member of the community. We must unite and together stand against this cancerous tumor that is consuming our society, he told them with deep conviction. He stressed the urgent need to stop violence from dominating their lives. These efforts were not in vain, and information, though coming in fragments, began to surface. Details emerged suggesting that Victor Mnguni had allegedly ordered the murder of Sifiso Mbule. The motive was to eliminate a competitor and force the Mbule family to abandon a lucrative route. It became clear that Mnguni himself, successful as he was in his business, resorted to violence and intimidation to expand his spheres of influence. However, during the course of the investigation, something unforeseen occurred. Victor Mnguni, who was suspected of orchestrating Sifiso Mbule's murder, was himself killed. This happened under very strange circumstances. He found himself caught in the crossfire during yet another shootout that erupted between warring taxi driver factions. Victor Mnguni's killers were never identified. The death of the prime suspect brought the investigation to a standstill, leaving questions unanswered. Were these the machinations of other rivals, or was Mnguni himself a link in a more extensive criminal organization? This question added another agonizingly deep layer of mystery and despair to an already difficult situation. Yet Noma Mbulu, despite this oppressive sense of uncertainty, was not about to back down. She clearly saw that Sifiso's demise was not an isolated, random event, but merely a grim manifestation of systemic evil. Driven by this newfound clarity, she began to cooperate even more actively with journalists drawn to the investigation of the so-called taxi mafia. Her personal story, her deep grief, and her relentless pursuit of justice were gradually transforming into a symbol, inspiring and supporting many others caught in similar predicaments. Public opinion began to shift, slowly but surely, towards understanding and condemnation. People grew bolder, speaking openly about the issue and expressing their outrage at how this taxi mafia stifled progress, sowed fear, and ruthlessly claimed innocent lives. At times, reflecting on this story, I can't shake a pervasive question. Why do people become hostages to such circumstances? Why does a system meant to protect and serve so often turn against those who trusted it, becoming a source of violence and injustice? And how do those who have lost everything manage to find an unbroken will to fight when it seems the entire world is against them? Noma, despite the unbearable loss of her beloved husband, refused to let her grief break her. She fought tirelessly to ensure the cause she championed continued, that the guilty, whoever they might be, would face deserved punishment. She became a voice for the many who were silent, those who were afraid or didn't know how to speak. Her profound personal grief became a powerful catalyst for change, igniting a spark of hope. Detective Ntlabi, in turn, continued his investigation with renewed vigor. Mnguni's death was not the final chapter. On the contrary, it only pushed him towards a deeper search for those truly behind it, those pulling the strings, orchestrating this so-called taxi mafia. He understood clearly, a single individual, no matter how influential or powerful they might seem, rarely acted entirely alone. Ultimately, through Noma's unwavering persistence and meticulous detective work, it was established that the direct perpetrators of Sifiso Mbule's brutal murder were two men hired by Victor Mnguni. One of them was apprehended, and faced with irrefutable evidence, he confessed, naming his accomplice. The second, to profound regret, managed to escape and, according to some reports, even left the country. The trial proved to be tense and emotionally taxing. Noma Mbule testified in court, her words resonating with genuine pain, yet also with remarkable resolve. She spoke of her husband, of the deep love that bound them, of how his life had been cynically taken simply for the thirst of money and power. Her speech was so heartfelt and profound, it touched the most hidden strings in the jurors' hearts. In the end, one of the murderers was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. This, of course, could not be called a complete victory, as the main organizer of the crime, Victor Mnguni, was already dead, and the second perpetrator remained at large. But it was an important step on the path to restoring justice. It was a step towards justice, a step towards finally stopping the lawlessness of the taxi mafia. This story, alas, is just one of many. Thousands of people in South Africa face similar hardships daily. The taxi mafia is not just a criminal phenomenon, but a deep symptom, a manifestation of serious social and economic ailments. It exposes how the lack of jobs, blatant inequality, and the weakness of state institutions can create a vicious cycle of violence and complete lawlessness. For Noma Mbule, life changed forever. She lost her husband, and her children were left without a loving father. Yet, a new, previously unknown strength now burns in her eyes. It is the strength of a woman who has endured unimaginable tragedy, but found the courage and resolve to fight for a better future for herself and her children. Her story serves as a poignant reminder that even in the deepest darkness, the human spirit can find its way to the light. This affair, like many others, left behind deep, indelible scars. They pierced the heart of families like sharp shards, tearing at the very fabric of our society. But despite this pain, it also starkly demonstrated that even the hardest fight for justice is never in vain, and that even in the most seemingly hopeless circumstances, the determined voice of a single individual can change the entire world. Only one agonizing question remains. When will we, as a society, finally triumph over those forces that, like vultures, seek to profit from the pain and suffering of others? And for how much longer shall we remain lost in such oppressive silence? When the desperate